To understand how modern institutions view the world, look at the physical spaces they build. On one side, you have the twisting, narrow alleys of a medieval city. On the other, the repeating 90-degree angles of a modern metropolis. One evolved organically over centuries, the other was designed from above. For most of human history, central governments operated in a state of administrative blindness. A king might claim authority over a territory, but he possessed almost no granular data about the people living within it. Look at a city like Bruges. A pre-modern state looking at this dense, irregular landscape could not catalog it. People lacked fixed patronymics. They were identified by their trade, like baker or smith, or by local geographic markers. Distances and weights were human-scaled and highly variable. A stone's throw or a cartload meant entirely different things depending on who was throwing the stone or whose cart was being loaded. Because the central state could not accurately perceive the landscape, power remained intensely local. Communities governed themselves according to internal, customary logic, insulated by the friction of a terrain the state could not map. Without a mechanism to measure crop yields, track individual citizens, or enforce property lines, a central authority is incapable of extracting resources or enforcing compliance. The state is forced to rely on indirect rule through local intermediaries. The drive toward legibility is the defining project of the modern state. To achieve legibility, the state invents static abstractions. It replaces the fluid, localized realities of daily life with standardized metrics, cadastral maps, and permanent identity records. Look at this National Registration Identity Card. A complex human life is reduced to typed fields, official stamps, and a fixed surname. This creates a synoptic gaze. The state is not interested in capturing the totality of your lived experience. It isolates only the specific utilitarian facts it needs to manage its population: taxes paid, land records, and mortality rates. Creating this kind of map requires epistemological violence. Forcing a complex, organic system to conform to a simplified, standardized model destroys the localized, practical knowledge that existed before the map was drawn. Legibility acts as a mechanism of active structural transformation, altering the very system the state claims to merely measure. The earliest application of this state legibility to ecological systems occurred in 18th century Prussia. Pre-modern European forests were dense, messy ecosystems. They contained trees of varying ages, thick undergrowth, and diverse flora and fauna. Local peasants relied on this complexity for overlapping survival needs: foraging for medicinal herbs, grazing cattle, and gathering kindling. State planners approached the forest using techne, abstract, codified, universal science. In doing so, they completely ignored the metis, the tacit, localized, practical wisdom of the peasantry, who understood how the ecosystem actually functioned over generations. To the Prussian state, the forest was simply a source of timber revenue. Planners cleared the chaotic old growth and replaced it with monoculture plantations of Norway spruce. They invented the Normalbaum, the standard tree, planted in identical, evenly spaced grids to maximize wood yield. The first generation of trees grew rapidly, consuming the nutrients banked by the preceding natural forest. But without the complex metis of nutrient cycling and biodiversity, the soil degraded. Pests thrived without natural predators. By the second and third rotations, yields collapsed. The Germans had to invent a new word for it: Waldsterben, or forest death. Optimizing a complex system for a single, legible metric destroys the invisible, resilient processes that keep that system alive. This mindset evolved into high modernism, an ideology that assumes visual, geometric order is functional rationality. In the mid-20th century, high modernism reached its peak with the construction of Brasilia. Designed by architect Oscar Niemeyer and urbanist Lucio Costa, it was the attempt to design a fully legible society from scratch. The planners laid out the city in the rigid shape of an airplane. They isolated residents into uniform housing blocks called superquadras, separated by vast, sterile lawns. A core tenet of the design was the intentional elimination of the traditional street, replacing pedestrian squares with high-speed avenues. The result was profound social alienation. The planners engineered a space perfectly suited for a hypothetical cookie-cutter citizen. They failed entirely to accommodate the messy, informal interactions that actually make a city function. High modernist design mistakes the God's eye visual order of a blueprint for the functional order of a lived environment. Catastrophe follows a specific trajectory. State-driven ordering meets an uncritical faith in progress, enforced by a regime that has dismantled every local check on its power. The resulting collision creates a heavy, oppressive central block of control. We see this exact combination in post-colonial Tanzania under President Julius Nyerere, who sought to modernize the country through a vision of planned rural socialism. For generations, Tanzanian farmers had relied on agricultural medicine. They utilized highly localized shifting cultivation techniques, planting different crops in scattered plots, a rational adaptation to volatile microclimates and fragile soils. The state viewed this dispersed, mobile farming as backward. Through the Ujamaa project, the government forcibly relocated millions of peasants into rigid, nucleated grid villages, mandating communal farming on fixed plots. The results were rapid and devastating. Pushing extensive mobile farming into concentrated areas led to severe soil exhaustion and massive crop failures. The forced relocations destroyed the informal elders' councils and kinship networks that formed the moral economy of the villages. F.A. Hayek identified the core flaw here as the calculation problem. By erasing local feedback loops, price signals, and decentralized decision-making, state planners were effectively operating in the dark. When central authorities prioritize their own administrative convenience over the decentralized, tacit knowledge of the people actually doing the work, they engineer mass deprivation. The state's gaze has moved from the physical map to the digital architecture. The same desire for a legible population that drove the invention of the fixed surname now powers the modern web. The 18th century state's dream of perfect legibility was limited by the friction of paper and human error. Today, that friction has evaporated. The project of classification continues through the semantic web and the Uniform Resource Identifier, or URI. A URI assigns a fixed, machine-readable identity to every physical object, human being, and transaction. Algorithms then use functions to connect these disparate identities, linking your browsing history, location data, and financial records into a single, inescapable documentary fact. While this digital grid enables technological convenience, it simultaneously provides the architecture for a transparent surveillance society. Historically, privacy was never guaranteed by a law or fundamental right. It was a temporary friction, an anomaly caused by the state's inability to process complex data across vast distances. The digital grid evaporates that friction. The gap between what we do and what the state can see is closing to zero. The preservation of illegible margins is essential. Ambiguity, unmapped spaces, and untracked interactions are not inefficiencies to be solved. They are the primary engines of human innovation and adaptation. Algorithmic high modernism operates under the hubris that every variable can be tracked and optimized. But if we allow data systems to completely over-describe our reality, we eradicate the very complexity that allows human systems to survive. Total legibility results in a digital Waldsterben, a perfectly ordered, rationally optimized society that has completely lost its capacity to create, adapt, and endure.